Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And today, we are continuing to watch the Robotyne salient. It appears that Ukrainian forces are now attempting to conduct a pivot towards the east. Or they're actually pivoting both west and east, with the main focal point of their pivot appears to be in this sector right here, which would be the eastern portion of the salient. If we look at other mapping systems that are out tracking just what is happening, you can see that the deep state map has a little bit different in terms of its reporting. It has the Ukrainians a little bit further. What's interesting is the Russians have allowed a total of, if you look at the penetration depth of the maximum distance of Ukrainian forces, it is about 8 kilometers. And what's interesting, the first period of offensive operations resulted in a 4-kilometer penetration of Russian lines. And we're really not going to call it a penetration of Russian lines because the Russian lines are down here. And we'll talk about that a little more. And the secondary push, the push that's happened over the last several weeks, again has resulted in an additional 4 kilometers. So a total of about 8.3 kilometers in distance we've seen the Ukrainians push to the south. Now, if we look at, again, the defensive belts of Russian forces, clearly the Ukrainians are engaged in combat around what is essentially the first defensive belts. Now, how many defensive belts are the Russians going to create? Well, quite frankly, as many as they need. We understand that the Russians are now working on possibly a 5th and 6th layer of defensive belts. If you look at just this area, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and eventually these are going to interconnect, and you're going to see additional layers that run parallel to Tokmak, both to the east and to the west. You can see they finished their defensive lines furthest to the south. You can see to the western portions. If you consider Orikhiv the center of the offensive, and everything west of Orikhiv and then east of Orikhiv, if you look at the Russian defensive lines to the west of Orikhiv, around the Indahar power station, just to the east of the Indahar power station. Again, it's much more significant in terms of layers of defensive belts. And you have to wonder, what does this additional defensive belt that the Russians are working on, what is that going to look like? And they are significant. But for the Ukrainians, they're not really paying attention to that right now. They're not looking at going any further south as we speak. It appears that they're trying to pivot, and they're trying to pivot east to widen this this pocket that has been created. Because again, the Ukrainians are in a very dangerous position given the narrowness of this pocket. And if they, again, as I talked about in the video yesterday, if they go any deeper, if they can go any deeper, they're going to run up against the Russians, positioning themselves to both the east and the western flanks of this salient. And if you look at Russian units that are positioning to the east and to the west, these are some of the Russians' best units. Again, you have the 56th Air Assault Regiment. That's a VDV unit, Airborne Parachute Infantry unit. 108th Airborne Air Assault Regiment. The 22nd Separate Special Purposes Spetsnaz Brigade. And then if you go to the western portions, you have Russian elite National Guard units, but more importantly, you have the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, the 291st Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade, And then this unit right here, the 104th Airborne Assault Regiment of the 76th Guards Airborne Division, which is positioned kind of center west of the salient. So again, the Ukrainians right now appear to be again pivoting, and they're trying to push to the east, and are probably have the thought process or have the strategy that they're going to try and clear out these defensive works, and they're going to operate from east to west or west to east in trying to clear out these defensive works. Now the question is, will they be successful? And we don't know that at this point. This battle is being fought as we speak. If we don't see this elongate, if we don't see it widen in terms of this salient, and this salient remains the same, it's going to be continuing to be very difficult for Ukrainian forces in this salient. Ultimately, they will be defeated in zone. If you go to the actual deployment map, you can see primary units. Now, there are additional units at work in this salient. I mean, you can see as far as military land is stating, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 brigades that are active in the salient, and possibly more, and possibly additional units that we know have been brought in to assist the Ukrainians in terms of widening the salient. But right now, that's not happening. We have not received any reports that there has been successful military operations by the Ukrainians in widening this salient. At the same time, we have received intel of the first losses of Challenger 2 main battle tanks. Now, we know the Challengers, in terms of how they are being utilized by the Ukrainians, they are being used in a standoff type of strategy. The Challenger 2 main battle tank with its rifled 120 millimeter gun has really good optics and incredible range. And they don't have many of them. They have about 14, a company-sized element of Challenger 2 main battle tanks, which again, they are using as long-range systems to engage Russian defensive redoubts at very long ranges, or Russian tanks at extended ranges. But the problem is, for the Ukrainians, the Russians outrange those Challengers. Because look, the Russians are not attempting to engage the British Challenger 2 main battle tank with T-90s or T-72s or T-80s. That's not what's happening. The Russians are engaging the Challenger 2 main battle tanks with greater standoff munitions, the likes of which that are deployed on the K-52 attack helicopter. We are seeing the Russians use its drone capability, and again, in all probability, the Challenger 2 that was recently destroyed, that we have verified video evidence of a destroyed Challenger, that was probably destroyed by Russian artillery, which has a greater range. Again, a tank is not is used as artillery. It's a direct line of sight weapon system. So again, in all probability, a Russian forward-deployed reconnaissance unit spotted that Challenger 2 and called in an artillery strike or a Lancet drone strike, which has significantly longer range than what that Challenger 2 can engage ground targets at. And therein lies right now the problem for Ukrainian forces operating in this area, is the fact that the Russians have those assets deployed in this area. And we're going to continue to see the Russians deploy its Air Force, its fixed-wing aircraft, and other systems as well, as they continue to pound the Ukrainian forces that are in this salient, especially if the Ukrainians aren't able to lessen the force density by widening this salient, which they have to do at this point. In order to achieve a victory, for the Ukrainians to achieve a victory in this war, they're going to have to widen this salient. And if they can't widen the salient, then they are going to have to accept that, in fact, they have been militarily defeated, which in all probability is going to occur. given the deployment of Russian forces that have been moved into this area and the deployment of the last vestiges of the Ukrainian strategic reserve that has been thrown into this maelstrom. So that's where we're at for today. We're going to continue to watch operations south of Orkiv as the battle of the Robotna salient continues, and we will continue to report as we get information. Again, thanks for joining us. As always, more to come very, very soon. Have a good day.